In June 2019 I released this video on the background where I covered all the changes to the standard ammunition on the SandBox test server. So far those changes are not in the game, but this is why SandBox server is over here when Wargaming needs a bit bigger audience to test out upcoming features, new features, rebalancing and so on. Us mortals are able to get into that as well. We are not able to get into the Immortals server, Super test server. But in June we were able to test standard shell rebalancing. And we got a little meme out of it in the community. Wargaming simply didn't want to nerf A, aka premium rounds, but they buffed everything from B to Z. Yeah, they touched every single caliber differently, penetration values stayed the same, but they raised the alpha damage on the standard rounds quite a lot, I have to say. So many times using standard rounds would have been way more beneficial. We haven't heard anything about host changes since, and now they released SandBox test server. Our SandBox test server is going to be over here in a couple hours, where we are able to test out HE shell rebalancing or rework, and let me tell you that right away, some of those shells, some of the calibers are going to be hit quite hard. Oh boy. In this episode I am going to cover this article, let's see what they have to say, what exactly they are going to test out over there, and when the server is actually going to be available, I am going to show you some gameplay action as well, for sure. And let me tell you guys, it is hard to be faster bringing those news to you because it was just now, literally like 30 seconds ago, uploaded. This article over here. Maybe if I can refresh it. Come on, just now, still just now. I would like to see 1 minute mark over there. Anyway, SandBox high explosive shells revision. Join the testing. Commanders, the next iteration of shell rebalancing tests is just around the corner, and World of Tanks needs your help again. This is why they are releasing SandBox servers. This time you have the opportunity to try out fundamental changes in the mechanics of dealing damage with HE shells. The testing will again be open to all tank commanders and will be held on the SandBox server. Join it and give us your feedback. Okay, this is what we're going to do when the SandBox server is going to be up. And guys, before I move on, keep in mind, it is a SandBox server, it is super early testing, super early public testing, it is not even that public testing what we usually get before patches. Everything is still subject to change. Why rebalance HE shells? Question mark. In two previous iterations of SandBox, we tested changes in the mechanics of the two main types of shells in our game, standard and special rounds. We reworked the parameters of standard shells and buffing HE as well, not HE, sorry, HP hit points. This is why we had that meme. They simply didn't want to nerf premium rounds, they actually wanted to buff everything else, aka standard shells damage, alpha damage, and they buffed every single, or HP on every single vehicle as well, which was the funniest thing ever in my opinion. Well, I guess they have to do it because some of the premium tanks, people have bought so many premium tanks in this game, and if they nerf anything on those premium tanks, if they nerf premium rounds, people would like to get a refund. I guess this is the only explanation I can come up with, at least. Anyway, after which the demand for special ones also changed. The main goal of these changes during the previous SandBox testing was to make standard shells more popular than special ones and to slightly reduce the effectiveness of special rounds. In my opinion, adding so much more alpha damage on the standard rounds actually makes you think which type of shells you would like to use. These changes worked well, and now we are ready to take the next step towards the complete rebalancing of shells in World of Tanks. We need to rework HE shells. We couldn't leave them unattended because such significant changes in the mechanics of standard and special shells would affect high explosive ones too. Inevitably. Yeah, okay. I can actually pronounce it. Oh, pat on my back. Moving forward, changes to the previous SandBox iteration, the revision of the standard shells and changes in the number of hit points for all vehicles in the game worked well, and they will also be included in the next iteration. Okay, so in the next SandBox iteration we are going to get all those new types of shells, seems like it, in which you can try them all out, yes. And note, we are currently testing the mechanics for dealing damage with HE shells only for regular tanks. This does not apply to SPG rounds or HESH rounds. Okay. We will still test in a separate iteration. Okay, HESH, please do not touch my HESH. No. We will still test him in a separate iteration, but only if we receive positive results from the current SandBox tests. Okay. The mechanics of dealing damage with HE shells are perhaps the most complicated aspect of our game to understand. It consists, well, RNG. Easy explanation. RNG, you roll the dice, you see what damage you get. It consists of a large number of stages and takes into account numerous parameters for the calculation. Let's take a closer look. The HE shell hits the armor, and the armor penetration is calculated depending on whether the armor is penetrated or not. If the armor is penetrated, damage from the full nominal damage is calculated. If the armor is not penetrated, damage is also calculated, but only from half of the value of the nominal damage. Next, the damage application point is calculated. Simply put, a weak spot is chosen in the radius of the sphere. Oh yeah, I remember that, where the damage is done. The value of half of the nominal damage is reduced proportionally and to the armor thickness and other factors at the damage application point. In addition, the damage calculation is affected by whether a spoiliner is mounted or not. After all these calculations, we arrive at the total damage value. So, just to give you a quick example, if you penetrate, you see the maximum value. Once again, you roll the dice, you get the maximum value damage roll, or penetration damage roll. If you do not penetrate, depending on where it hit, it is looking for the weakest armor and it tries to deal damage to that point. As far as I understand. This is why it is actually quite useful to splash underneath the vehicle, because damage or the armor is lower underneath the tank usually. But when we talk about calculations of these mechanics, most of the current aspects are outdated and don't match the current realities of the game. This doesn't allow us to fine-tune the effectiveness of HE shells for specific guns, and that is exactly the aspect we want to change. Alright, so what are the current issues with HE shells? Our players rarely use high explosive shells as standard ammunition. Well, if you're not trying to free mark Foch 155 with full HE, then yes. I was stupid enough to agree to this, but let's move on. For reliably dealing damage. This mainly happens when playing on vehicles with caliber of 150mm and above. For lower and medium ones, HE shells are often used to reset the base capture, yes. Finish off an enemy low on HP, yes. Deal damage in a situation where it is impossible with other shell types, yes. And tracking as well sometimes. And to get penetrations into the booper. This is what you forgot to note over here, into the booper part. On the contrary, the effectiveness of HE shells on medium and small calibers is very low, and the use of HE rounds in the above situation doesn't guarantee a result. Yes, indeed it doesn't. At the same time, high explosive rounds can cause huge damage to weakly armored vehicles, and very often this happens by accident. When you shoot without carefully targeting your enemy's weak spots. The amount of damage is always different, and even an experienced player cannot predict it in each specific case. Given all of the above, the main goal of the changes for us is to balance the effectiveness of high explosive shells for all guns and calibers existing in our game. We want to reduce the amount of total and alpha damage on large calibers from 150mm and above, and to improve the performance of HE shells on lower and medium calibers in specific situations. How will we achieve this? Let's take a closer look. Number 1. High explosive shells armor penetration removal. Okay, so first key criteria over here. Yes, that is right, says Wargaming. We want to completely remove the ability to penetrate armor with HE shells, with high explosive rounds. Even into those open-top vehicles you're talking about, or vehicles like Guerrilla 15. We have many of those things over here, so this is actually kind of interesting. If the tests are successful, then HE rounds will no longer have an armor penetration parameter. Initially, high explosive shells had these characteristics to simulate HE damage mechanics in a more realistic way, but as stated above, HE shells in World of Tanks are almost never used for reliable dealing damage, unless you are trying to... Remark Voice 155. Even with a skillful aim, penetrating and inflicting huge damage is not guaranteed. We want to avoid a huge spread in the final value of damage when players cannot predict whether they will inflict a nominal value damage, a third of it, or no damage at all. So, armor penetration removal. Number 2. Changing the mechanics of damage distribution over the splash radius. If an HE round didn't penetrate the armor, then the system started calculations according to the damage from formula from 0.5 in the center to 0.05 at the edge of the splash. Put simply, when a high explosive shell doesn't penetrate armor in the current gameplay, half of the shell's nominal damage is immediately deducted, and then the damage decreases depending on the distance to the center of the explosion. With the new mechanics, HE shells don't penetrate armor at all, which means that his method of calculating is no longer relevant. After the rebalance, the damage will be distributed over the splash radius, varying from 1 in the center to 0.1 at the edge. The full nominal damage of the HE shell will be used for calculation all the time. So it is not going to deduct it right away, even with no penetration. And now, really interesting part. Nominal damage reduction. Given the above, such a high nominal damage inflicted by HE shells is no longer needed. It would be overpowered. And we will significantly reduce it depending on the caliber of the gun. The proportion of damage and the specific caliber will also change. Previously, the base damage for highest calibers 150mm and above was truly great. Now the damage gain with increasing calibers will be smaller and more consistent. And higher caliber HE rounds are going to be nerfed quite a lot. Below is the table comparing old and new damage values for the main calibers in the game. Parameters may vary depending on the individual tank or shell settings. Okay, so 76mm gun. It was from 156 up to 260, now 55 up to 95. But once again, no penetration RNG. 90mm caliber from 270 up to 370, down to 95 to 115. 105mm guns, we have so many of them in this game. It was up to 510 from 360, now it is up to 180 from 130. Oh boy. RIP so many awesome HE tanks actually. What happens to the EBR-105? EBR-105 has such a beautiful HE round with 105mm of penetration, if I'm not mistaken. All those tanks are going to be nerfed quite hardcore. All those tanks which HE made actually a lot better. Good HE penetration. 120mm gun from 440 up to 530, down to 180 up to 190, so the gap is only 10. 122mm guns from 450 up to 560, new values 180 up to 190 as well. Okay, 130mm guns 580 up to 750, down to 210 up to 270. 150mm, aka HE E100, for example, from 890 up to 950. down to 320 to 330. And now, ladies and gentlemen, 183mm boomstick on FE 4005 and 183. HE shell 1750 damage previously, down to 480. So I don't know actually. What do you think about that? What do you think about this table over here? All those nerfs, all those numbers. Let me know in the comments down below. Please do that. Number 4, damage decrease from the center of the splash. In the new system, damage is calculated from 1 in the center to 0.1 along the edge. The fundamental difference between the new system and previous one is that splash becomes less tense. Even at a small distance from the center of the explosion, the damage is greatly reduced. At the same time, it remains possible to cause low damage at the edge of the splash. So less completely zero damage HE hits, I guess, with this new system. The splash effectiveness will be reduced, especially closer to the center. Accordingly, HE rounds will cause lower damage to internal and external modules as well as crew members. So tracking is not going to be as useful anymore. And if you say to the internal and external modules, this means using HE versus T-capping is not as effective anymore, I guess. This is what they're saying. Changing the tracing algorithm and the minimal damage. Damage dealt will be much more predictable, not only due to the removal of penetration, but also thanks to 2 key components. Changing the tracing algorithm and the ability to inflict minimal damage due to the splash mechanics. More on this below. So algorithm finding points for causing damage to various armor groups, modules and crew members. The current algorithm often doesn't find obvious weak spots, and the HE shell may not cause any damage at all. Yes, we have all seen those zero damage hits. The new algorithm finds the required points more often and more accurately than the current one. Simply put, it is simply looking for the weak spots, and it is going to deal damage to that weak spot, depending on the distance of the explosion. As they explained before, the ability to inflict damage done in this way will be high, but in critical situations it will increase the possibility of causing at least minimal damage. For example, to prevent base capture. Okay, so it actually is going to deal that minimal damage to almost 100%. Alright, this is actually a good thing. Below, under the spoiler, is more detailed information on how the new mechanics will work. And over here we have quite a lot of text, so let's go over some key components over here. And splash mechanics will include 3 components. Sharpnel from the shell explosion, spalls on the outer surface of the armor, and splash radius. Sharpnel from the shell explosion, splash on the outer surface of the armor, and splash radius. So this is how the splash mechanic is going to work. Now more about each of them. So here you can read more about each of them, but we know the core mechanics already. So what will happen to HE shells after these changes take effect? Number 1, HE shells will do less damage on average per shot, up to 66 to 75% of the previous damage value. HE shells will do less critical damage to internal and external modules and crew members. It will be impossible to set vehicle on fire to the engine if you hit the commander's cupola, commander hatch. There will be virtually no cases when damage doesn't occur at all when a HE round hits the armor, excluding spaced armor. Okay, so spaced armor is still going to protect you from those HE rounds and may deal zero damage. This will help to improve the behavior of HE shells, for example when preventing base capture or finishing off an enemy with only a few HP remaining. HE shells will expand their scope of use. Now they will be effective not only at large but also at small and medium calibers. Okay, so this is true. The full HE Badger 25T is going to be a meme now. Yes. Weakly armored vehicles will no longer receive such enormous damage from penetrations. They will still take more damage than heavily armored tanks, but not 3 times more. How do we see the use of the reworked HE shells? You just said it, resetting base captures progress. Now the chance to reset is much higher. Finishing off opponents low on HP. Immobilizing enemy vehicles for the reworked HE rounds. The chance of tracking or damaging external modules is higher. What? For the reworked HE shells, the chance of tracking and damaging an external module is higher. And you just said it. Where was it? Somewhere over here. HE shells, what will happen to HE shells after these changes take effect? HE shells will do less critical damage to internal and external modules and crew members. Immobilizing enemy vehicles for the reworked HE round, the chance of tracking or damaging an external module is higher. I don't know, too much text over here, such a big article, so much information. Maybe my brain is farting at the moment. I don't know, I cannot hear it. Maybe it is quite obvious thing what I'm missing over here. Join the test, your feedback is important. If you participated in the previous stages of SandBox server, your progress will continue during the new iteration. Okay, so this is a good thing because previously we had to start from tier 1. We had to grind all the way up to tier 10 to test out tier 10. Vehicles as well. Okay, so introduction to the new HE rounds. Nerfs, quite a big damage nerfs. Removal of the penetration completely. More consistent damage, but lower damage. All this is what we can take away from this article. Please let me know what you think about it, and if I have any gameplay action, if I can see any gameplay, or if I'm able to get into the SandBox server, I am going to provide some gameplay action for you as well on this YouTube channel. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, like button, bell button, so you are going to be notified. And you know what? If I am lucky, if I feel awesome, I'm actually going to be streaming today as well on the SandBox server. We'll see. Link is in the description. Let me know what you think about this one. I catch you next time with something else. Stay awesome, take care, and bye.